Remdesivir, just right for mama bears. Almost everyone has heard of this anti-COVID drug called Remdesivir. After all, it was used to treat President Trump after he tested COVID positive. This is a medication that was developed by Gilead Sciences in order to suppress Ebola, but was not effective against Ebola in clinical trials. You might also have heard different opinions about whether it actually works in COVID. In fact, there are two recent scientific reports that say almost the exact opposite. An American study from the National Institutes of Health, or NIH, claims that remdesivir helps patients with COVID, and a World Health Organization, or WHO study, claims that it does not. So if you're wondering who is right, stick with me for a bit. In the next few minutes, I'm going to take you right past all the opinions to go straight to the facts, so we can draw our own conclusions about this controversial drug. Welcome to my world of evidence-based medicine. Let's start with that American study. In early October, the NIH investigators published their final results in the New England Journal of Medicine. I was pleased to note in their methods that this was a double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled trial, our gold standard of evidence for medical treatments. I was also pleased to see that this study was neither funded nor supervised by Gilead Sciences, the maker of the drug, who would have had a strong financial interest in sugarcoating the results. So I feel confident that this study was not tainted by bias and that the results do not represent fake news. So now let's cut to the chase. In this study, more than 1,000 patients hospitalized with COVID were treated with either remdesivir or with a dummy drug disguised as remdesivir so that neither the patients nor their doctors could know who was getting what. This so-called blinding helps prevent bias in the way subjects are treated and outcomes are assessed. The subjects were followed closely for a month to see how they made out. This is the table of results. That looks pretty daunting, but we're going to boil this down to just a few key numbers. First, let's focus on the time it took patients to recover. After all, this was the main point of the study. When I magnify this, we can see that the control group recovered in an average of 15 days, while remdesivir-treated patients recovered on average in 10 days. These are the two key numbers. This is a noticeable improvement in recovery time, and it is statistically meaningful. Therefore, the investigators declared that this drug does help patients. But recovery time is not what people are most interested, right? They're way more concerned about survival, about living and dying. Let's take a look at that. Even though this was not the main point of the study, the researchers reported on mortality down here, so let's blow that up. Here we see that fewer remdesivir patients died, so the drug appeared to reduce the death rate from 15% to 11%. That seems promising. Unfortunately, this difference was not quite large enough to escape the possibility that it came about from the play of chance, so the researchers could not make a claim of mortality benefit in this paper. Nonetheless, I would like to dig a little deeper, so let's take a closer look. What the researchers did was to divide patients into groups based on how sick they were: mild, moderate, and severe. Patients at level 4 were hospitalized but did not require oxygen treatment. Patients at level 5 required some oxygen, but not a lot. This is apparently the level that President Trump was at. Patients at level 6 required high levels of oxygen. There was also a level 7, patients who required a ventilator, but I'm going to ignore them because their results were pretty much identical to those at level 6. Let's start with level 4, the mild group, by looking at their mortality rate, which I will magnify for our benefit. Note that both groups had very similar mortality rates, as a little more than 4% of subjects in each group died. The bottom line is that everyone at this mild level did pretty well, with very few patients dying in either group, and no real advantage from taking the medication. When we jump 2 steps to level 6, the severe group on high-level oxygen, we find mortality rates are much higher, about 20% in each group. But again, not much difference between the two groups, so no apparent advantage by taking the drug. But what about level 5, the moderately ill group in the middle? When we look at their mortality rates, we see an impressive difference. While nearly 13% of the control group died, only 4% of the remdesivir group died. Thus, by treating 100 patients with remdesivir, only 4 patients would die instead of 13, and 9 lives would be saved. Not too shabby. So in summary, remdesivir did not help baby bear patients with mild disease, nor did it help papa bear patients with severe disease, but it did appear to save lives in mama bear patients, the in-between group with moderate disease. In this case, it was the mama bears who were just right for a treatment benefit. So is it fair to single out this one group in this very large comprehensive study? Isn't that an example of cherry picking? Slicing and dicing the results till we come up with something we like? One must be careful, but I would argue that it is okay to do that in this case for two reasons. First, the difference in outcomes in the level 5 group was quite striking and statistically strong. Even more important, it makes biological sense that a drug has its biggest impact on the mama bear group. All through my world of medicine, it is often true that patients with mild disease do not benefit from a treatment because they will do fine whether they get it or not. And patients with severe disease may not derive benefit because it's too late to help them. It is often the folks in the middle for whom the treatment makes all the difference. That's our sweet spot. So I am willing to hang my hat on this finding from the NIH trial, which was well designed and free from bias. Remdesivir is not a cure-all, not a magic bullet for COVID, but hospitalized patients on modest amounts of oxygen, the biggest group, will likely recover faster and be less likely to die if they are treated with this drug. Now, what about that WHO study that was reported last week, shortly after the final report of the NIH trial? In the WHO trial, which was also large and free from drug company bias, there was no apparent benefit of remdesivir on recovery time or mortality. However, the WHO trial lumped all the bears together. It didn't sort out the mama bears, and it had a serious flaw in design. It was not a blinded trial. Every treating physician knew whether his or her patient was in the treatment group or the control group, which created an unacceptable opportunity for bias to creep into the results. If I know my patient is on remdesivir, it might influence all the other decisions I make about that patient, including what other drugs to use or not use, and whether or when to put my patient on a ventilator. So in the lineup of study designs, the American study is a gold standard, and the WHO study is a silver. For that reason alone, I am going to take as my final word the positive results of the NIH study and continue to recommend remdesivir for mama bears like President Trump. As a final disclaimer, I do not have any financial relationship with either Gilead Sciences, the NIH, the WHO, or the US government, except that I pay federal taxes, of course, and write political essays that are mostly critical of our national leadership.